My dad has a client that owns a number of fast food restaurants. One day we were working at one of his stores and talking about some robberies. The client had told us that when he was just getting into the fast food business, he lived in Colorado. He was an assistant manager at a chain that required him to wear a tie. A drug addict came into the restaurant to rob them and then grabbed him from behind, putting a knife up to his throat. He opened the register and the guy attempted to slit his throat anyway, except the knife was dull and he couldn't cut through the material of the tie. The client began to fight back and then escaped with minor injuries. That very same addict ended up going to prison, and apparently he still has that tie in a frame at his home. I was a bouncer at a club in Los Angeles for a minute in the 90s. I stopped a couple of dudes that were clearly affiliated in a gang at the door after they refused security checks. After a couple of minutes of their threats, they left spewing all sorts of crazy warnings at me. A little while later, it starts to wind down, and because it's a little slow and we're overstaffed, I start to drink. I get a little bit drunk, not wasted but kind of just sleepy buzzed. So I tell my buddy that I'm going to go lay down in the back of his car for a while. A couple of minutes after laying down, I realize I have to take a piss. I get out and kind of stumble a few into a spot between a guard gate and a building for a little bit of privacy. I'm about 25 feet away from the club's entrance and just off in the alleyway. While I'm relieving myself and doing my thing, this dude runs right past in front of me, around the guard booth to my rear, and then unloads a 9mm into the back seat of the car that I just crawled out of. It was about 4 loud shots unloading into the car. The man then turns, runs right back past me, and then down into the alley into the night. I don't think he saw me at all. Nothing really came of this afterwards, except my partner was convinced that I was a marked man and absolutely refused to be near me for about a year or so. I'm really glad that I didn't end up getting shot. It's absolutely chilling to me to think what would have happened if I wouldn't have gotten out of that car when I did.
I was reading a story on this subreddit that reminded me of an event from over 20 years ago. In the second half of 1998, I had taken a job as a security guard at a plant that made locks. Being a kid, I usually worked one of 3 shifts: 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., or 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30 to 3:30 shift was just for extra coverage, so there were always 2 of us from 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. Things went by in an almost painfully normal manner for 6 months. I worked, saved, bought a car, and planned to move. By late March of '99, I served my notice and prepared to head cross country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working at all hours. At night he was a shadow, working with myself and the other night guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights, he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older, was quiet and polite, though something seemed to be missing. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I chalked it up to him being awkward. That wouldn't last. One night, near the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew something was wrong. Normally talkative, she would barely say a word. Not sure what occurred, I waited until Calvin had gone to the restroom to ask. During their trip, everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There were usually no employees there after that time, and no lights. They were making their way to a checkpoint on a landing atop a flight of stairs when the mood shifted. She told me that she turned around only to find that he was right on top of her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing, and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted with her in a low voice, and when she mentioned his wedding band, he said that it would be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin with me each time. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had happened. The next night came and went with no Calvin. I did the rounds, while Amira stayed in the locked office. Same thing the night after. Then, on my second to last shift, I come in to find her freaking out. She found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned, parts of her body placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. That night and the next, Amira called the jail just to make sure they were still holding him. Based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he started the job. Many years ago when I was 13, I was visiting with a friend at his house. We'll call him Bob. Along with another friend of his. We'll call him Rick. We were the only ones home during the time. During our visit, we were doing normal bullshit that 13-year-olds do, like playing Xbox, shooting Nerf guns at each other, and things like that. Both Bob and Rick regularly attended church, and even went to a Christian private school. They were both relatively sheltered, and weren't the type of kids to pull pranks or be mischievous. Late in the afternoon, I was bullshitting with Rick while Bob was playing video games about 10 feet away. And then Rick decided that he would try and make a pentagram so that he could summon the spirit of his dog who had recently died. He told me that he had read about it somewhere and wanted to try it. I was, and still am, open-minded yet skeptical, so I watched as he proceeded to do his thing. I watched as Rick took a bunch of Nerf darts and formed a pentagram shape on the floor. He then said whatever words that were required to complete the ritual, and as soon as he was finished, an alarm in the house immediately started blaring. The three of us were a bit freaked out, and Rick destroyed the pentagram. We then ran outside and chilled for about an hour or so. It took the alarm approximately a half hour to stop blaring. Bob was my neighbor, so I went over to his house hundreds of times over the course of my childhood, and I never heard an alarm go off that sounded like that one. It almost sounded like an electronic telephone ringing one non-stop tone. When we all eventually went back inside, night had fallen. The three of us started playing Halo and chalked it up to a weird coincidence. After a couple of hours, I convinced Rick to try and make a pentagram again to see if we could replicate what had happened earlier. He obliged and again made a pentagram out of the Nerf darts in the same spot as before. During both of these events, Rick and I were standing right next to each other by the pentagram, and Bob was about 10 feet away in plain sight playing video games. Once again, as soon as Rick was finished forming a pentagram and said the magic words, the same alarm went off. We all three again ran outside and waited until the alarm went silent, which again took about half an hour. We were all pretty weirded out by it, and we decided not to try to do it again. Bob was noticeably freaked out, and Rick was also in disbelief that it had actually done anything. We decided among the three of us to not talk about it with anyone else, lest others would think we were just making up stories. It took me about 2 years to finally tell anyone else about it, and at this point, I've told anyone who's willing to listen, so I can try to get a better understanding about what happened. I remember going home that night, paranoid that a spirit would haunt me, but nothing of the sort ever happened. Bob is still in contact, but has since moved away, and I haven't seen Rick in about 8 years. I brought this up with Bob a few years ago, and I asked if he remembered. I described it to him, and he confirmed that it did in fact happen the exact same way I remember, but he didn't seem to want to talk about it, so I didn't press it. Since this happened, I've become much more interested in the unknown. If anyone can lead any additional insight on what may have caused this to happen, I would really appreciate it. I live in a small city in Romania, around 30,000 inhabitants. Romania isn't exactly known for their tolerance of gay people. It's not as bad as other places, such as Russia, but the situation is definitely not rosy here either. I get on Grindr and I meet this guy. He's 18 years old apparently. The guy didn't have a picture of his face as his PFP because it's too dangerous. He had a picture of a rose drawing. Most guys on Grindr here don't have pictures of themselves. We talked for a bit, and I really liked the guy, and then we finally agreed to exchange face pictures. I sent him a selfie of myself, and he sends me a picture of a guy that I'd seen around our city. He was cute, and I really like him. So I told him, "Hey, I see you around the city all the time. I didn't know you were gay too." We talked and finally arranged to meet. I had some errands to run at the tailor shop. My cousin's bachelorette party is coming next week, and I had to adjust my favorite shirt, so I asked him to meet me in front of the tailor shop. The building in which the tailor shop is located has 4 stories. The ground floor is a clothes shop, which my aunt works at. The first floor is a storage facility. The 3rd floor is a barber salon, and the 4th floor was a tailor shop. I go to the tailor shop, and then go to the clothes shop on the ground floor to visit my aunt and see how she's doing. As I'm looking out the window of the clothes shop, I notice that there are 5 guys, all of them in their late 20s, behind the building. None of them was the guy I had the picture of, and none of them even looked remotely close to what the guy looked like. I text the guy I was supposed to meet and ask him if he's made it to the tailor shop. As soon as I send the message, one of the 5 guys' phones lights up, and he started texting. As soon as he stopped texting, I get a notification from Grindr. I'm behind the tailor shop. I went there to smoke so no one would see me. Come smoke with me, winky face. I was terrified as I realized I wasn't going to meet the guy in the picture. He tries again to get me to go behind the tailor shop, and I try to get him to go to the side of it. There were no windows to the side of the building, so after a few tries, he agreed to meet me at the side. All 5 guys went to the side of the building. I peeked my head from the door, looked left and right, and as soon as I saw the coast was clear, I made a run for it. So, Grindr cutie, let's not meet. This happened to my dad roughly 30 years ago. My dad had been out at work all day and was cold, wet, and tired, and finally on his way home. We had some close family friends that lived about a mile away from us at the time. My dad is driving home, and he's on 20th Street, getting very close, perhaps less than a mile from our house. Now, both of our families live off of 20th, but in different neighborhoods. The route my dad took home that night would have taken him past our friend's neighborhood first. As he's sitting at the intersection nearest our friend's neighborhood, waiting for the light, he suddenly gets this very strange and overwhelming urge to stop at their house first. Why? He's cold, wet, tired, and hungry. He's had a long day. He just wants to go home. But this feeling is too strong to ignore. So when the light turns green, he drives down the street and turns off into their neighborhood. He gets to their house and, as usual, he just walks in. The way their house is set up, there's a short entry hall that then opens up on the left to the living room. A few feet further in on the right is the hallway where the bedrooms are. Straight ahead is the dining room. Through the dining room and to the left is the kitchen, and through the kitchen is the family room. So my dad walks in and stops. Then, off to the right down the hall, he hears a strange voice. It's not very loud, so he turns to look. At the end of the dark hallway, he sees my godbrother, Jerry, who is a year and a half old or so, sitting on the floor with his back to the wall facing my dad. My dad walks toward him and is trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Why is he down here all by himself? What's this noise he's making? He finally gets close enough to realize that Jerry's choking. So my dad grabs Jerry and starts skip hopping. My dad is an amputee and can't run. The best he can do is kind of quick skip hop toward the end of the house, yelling for Jerry's parents. He gets Jerry to the kitchen, grabs him by the ankles, and holds him upside down over the sink. Jerry's pretty purpley blue by this point. Jerry's parents, who had been in the family room, came running. They're confused and scared, and my dad whacks Jerry in the back in an attempt to dislodge whatever is causing him to choke. Nothing happens. He turns to Jerry's dad and says, "If his ribs break, I don't want to be the one to break them. Hit him. Hard." So Jerry's dad hauls off and whacks him on the back, and out comes a rock. Thankfully, no ribs were broken. So, Jerry starts breathing again. Everyone's calming down, and Jerry's dad says to my dad, "Where the hell did you come from?" My dad just kind of shook his head and told him about the feeling he had. To this day, he is still amazed by the whole thing.
Okay, so I'm using a throwaway account because it got some pretty big media. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I was representing this guy that had embezzled almost $500,000 from his business partner. He was looking down at the barrel at several years in prison. A bunch of his assets had been seized by the government. He was being sued by multiple creditors for north of $2 million, and was in the midst of an ugly divorce and wasn't allowed to see his kids. I happened to be one of the 3 lawyers that he had: criminal, civil, and divorce. He was drinking a lot and using coke. I used to get this incoherent phone calls in the middle of the night that ranged from threats to crying. One day he came to my office and asked for me, but I wasn't there and I was in court at the time. My secretary said that he was being perfectly civil at the time. After that, he then went to his divorce lawyer's office and then shot him to death. He got stopped by the police a short distance away and he was wounded in a shootout. He would later end up telling the cops that he came to my office to shoot me that day as well, and also had planned to shoot his civil attorney too. Yeah, I really dodged a bullet that day. Literally. I have a friend who had a party at his parents' house when he was in high school that a ton of random people went to. He got super drunk during the party and then went upstairs to go take a nap, knowing that his friends would probably watch the party for him. My friend woke up from his nap to a guy from his high school sitting on top of him, stabbing him to death. He was stabbed about 7 times before it was stopped, and he just laid there on the bed, just dying. The only reason he's still alive is because one of his best friends came upstairs to ask if it was alright if he made a frozen pizza, and that's when he found his friend just lying there in a bloody pool. The assailant was put in jail and recently released, and it absolutely scares me to know that that guy who wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone is still out there free. I was abducted at a gas station during undergrad. The locks on my car were broken, and as soon as I got back in, there was a strange man that came in and then forced me to drive him to an ATM. I'm absolutely paralyzed with fear, so any sense or reason that I had just totally went out the window. He claimed that he worked at a Wendy's, and for my generosity, he would give me all the Wendy's that I would ever want. On the way to the ATM, he showed me pictures of his daughters, which were clearly on a stolen cell phone. Then a Whitney Houston song came on the radio, and he just starts bawling his eyes out and screaming, "Why do all the good people have to die? Bad things should only happen to bad people." I go to the ATM, take out the cash, give it to him, thinking it's over, and then he makes me get back in the car and drive him somewhere else. We pass by some train tracks, and I'm just thinking that this is it. This is where I'm going to die. He asks me what I'm studying in school, and I tell him biochemistry. "I believe in jet propulsion and all that crap. We're not alone. Aliens are among us." That's what he said to me. He makes me pull over at a gas station, and then he tells me, "Drive away, sweetheart. Get out of here." After that, I called the cops and I had to do a lineup. Apparently this dude had done this to a ton of other women, and some of them were less unscathed than I was. I was an 18-year-old female back when this happened. I'm now 25. I was on my way home at nighttime after meeting with a friend. My home was just about 10 minutes away from the train station. After a few minutes, I felt someone following me. No big deal, I thought, just someone else walking home as well. But I started walking faster. I realized that the person behind me was starting to catch up. Weird. In my head, I started to make up scenarios of how to defend myself if the person were to attack me. Now, never would I think of this to actually happen to me. Well, until I felt something on the back of my head hitting me really hard. I went furious. I turned around and then attacked the guy. My mind was just full of anger towards this random stranger who what I thought that hit me. We were wrestling until I fell hard on the ground. He was sitting on top of me, strangling me. I tried to dig my nails deep into his eyes as deep as I could, but I started to black out. Suddenly, there was this thought in my head. You need to wake up or you're going to die here." Well, adrenaline kicked in yet again, and I opened my eyes and then screamed at the top of my lungs, once more attacking him. That helped. The man then stood up and began to run away. I kind of just laid there on the ground for a few seconds before I started to run back home, still screaming. My mom was already at our door and opened the door for me because my screams were so loud that they woke her up. My mom immediately called the cops so that they could arrest him on the same night. As it turns out, the man actually shot me in the head from behind. They assumed that the gun didn't work properly as the bullet didn't penetrate my skull and just stuck in there. But as far as I know, they never found out why the gun misfired. I'm really glad though. The man told the cops that he had already followed me a few times in the past, but he had never had the guts to go through with it. This isn't even the worst part of the story. Apparently he told the police that not only did he want to kill me, but he also wanted to rape my dead body. I'm very fortunate to have survived this, and it's probably the most terrifying thing that's happened to me to date. Please everyone, be safe out there, and always watch your surroundings. This happened to me about 5 years ago. A very important detail to share is that I always kept a pistol in my car, because you just never know when you might absolutely need it. I was driving home from visiting family who lived several hours away from me. I decided to pull into a gas station because I just wanted to get a pack of cigarettes at the time. I was a pretty heavy smoker back then. It was broad daylight, but since this was in the middle of nowhere, business appeared to be dead and there wasn't a single other customer there. The only car present was the one parked on the side of the station, presumably belonging to the clerk at the desk. As I approached the door, I noticed an old homeless man leaning on the corner of the store. Something about him just made me feel uncomfortable, so I made sure to stay sharp. I'm at the counter getting smokes, and the lady working then tells me, "Hey, keep an eye on that guy out there. He's been acting really strange and sketchy all day." I thank her for the heads up and walk out the door. I come out and the man is now leaning on the driver's side door of my car. At this point, I really don't have the patience to calmly ask him to move. So I decide to look at him and then yell, "Dude, get the hell away from my car." The man just stares at me and doesn't say anything. I then think to myself, okay, fine, I'll make this idiot move. I walk up to the passenger door, open it, and then lean in it, and then right from behind me, I then hear, "Give me your wallet." I quickly reach into my glove box, grab my pistol, turn around, and then point it directly to his head, all within a split second. The man backs up and I look down, and I then notice he's holding a kitchen knife in his hand. The clerk then comes outside and calls the police. The man takes off running into the woods behind the store. To this day, I always wonder what would have happened to me if I didn't have that gun on me. This happened approximately 3 years ago. I was 22 or 23 years old at the time. For an introvert much like myself, meeting someone in real life was not really a possibility for me, so I resorted to online dating. Plenty of fish to be exact. I got a few responses to my profile, and most of which consisted of, "What are you doing tonight? Want to meet up?" etc. Until I then received a message that was almost a paragraph in length. I tended to reply to those that wrote more than just one sentence. This guy's name was Paul. Paul and I talked for maybe about a month or two, then I slowly stopped replying. He was the kind of person that would always respond to you in novels. I could simply ask what his plans for the summer were, and I would always have to read through a ton of useless fluff to find the actual answer to my question. After a while, it just got really old, so I just stopped replying. Well, a week or so after I did that, he found me on Instagram. I didn't really think much of it at the time other than, well, I'm not talking to you, And he began messaging me on there, to which I held my response from him for a few more weeks. In the course of 3 weeks, he reached out to me via Plenty of Fish and Instagram probably about 10 to 15 times, and also checking my profile daily. A couple of more days pass, and I receive a friend request on Facebook. It was from Paul. Now, I have the most Caucasian name, comparable to Jane Smith, so I have no idea how he found me. I thankfully am a very cautious person, especially about the information that I share on my profile. The doctor that I worked for at the time, well, her practice wasn't searchable on Google yet, so it's absolutely bone-chilling to this day how he found me. Anyways, I was the only tech on duty at the time, and this tall gangly man then walks in. I ask him if he's there for an appointment, and he actually ended up clenching his fists and then slammed them on my desk, then saying,
"No, my name is Paul."
While he's grinding his fists into my desk, he then mutters,
"And I'm here to talk to you."
My entire body went limp. The air in my chest then escaped and all of the color was totally drained from my body. I told him he needs to leave immediately and how inappropriate it was for him to come to my work like that. He changed his attitude of intimidation to a more remorseful demeanor and begged me to message him because he really wanted to talk. I told him I'd message him after work, and he left. I ended up messaging him a barrage of questions, like how did you find me at work, what were you doing there, etc. He told me that he was really sorry that he came to my place of business, but informed me that his intentions weren't ill. I kept hounding him on how he found me. He said that he went to my Facebook and saw that I worked for a doctor. He had been having some physiological issues lately, and he wanted to see someone. So I guess he decided to take the name of my doctor and boss and then typed it into Google, got the address, and then drove down. The only confliction was that I worked for an optometrist, which, if you type her name into Google, it pops up that she's an OD, not MD. I'd also like to add that the office is inside of an optical shop, and he actually passed through countless eyeglass frames, and he also didn't seem to get why his story was so bogus to me when I pointed out the inconsistencies. I ended up telling him just to please leave me alone. He eventually replied in an apologetic tone and stopped messaging me. Well, for about an hour. He then sent me more messages saying how he's always made out to be the bad guy and how I need to get my head out of my butt and it's no wonder that I'm single. I decided to block him after that, and I didn't hear from him for about 5 months. Then he actually had the audacity to message me on the new year and ask if I'd give him another shot. Yeah, right. So I'd like to start out by saying that this happened when I was 15. I'm now a 33-year-old mother of 2. When I was a kid, we moved around a lot, and one of the places we lived was a small country town of about 1,800 people in the bottom of the state of Tasmania, right at the bottom of Australia. When I was 15 years old, we had an elderly neighbor in his late 60s. Let's call him John. Well, John had befriended my mom and stepdad, and confided in them that his family lived on the mainland, and he had just been diagnosed with cancer. So he didn't really have anyone. Despite this diagnosis, he was a fairly fit and strong-looking older man, who was about 6'2" or taller, with white hair and a white-looking thick mustache. My parents felt sorry for him and they used to invite him over for dinner, and they would always check on him and make sure he was doing okay. He became a pretty regular part of our lives, always chatting to me and my younger sister and coming over to our house pretty regularly. Well, one time my mom and stepdad went over to his place and they had a few glasses of wine. Even though my mom wasn't really a big drinker and probably didn't have much of a tolerance, she later said that she felt like she was extremely drunk and spaced out, but just brushed it off to thinking she drank too much. One day close to Christmas, he approached my mom and he asked her if he could take me out shopping to pick out some presents for his granddaughter, who apparently was around the same age as me. My mom asked if I was okay with it, and I said yes because I just really wanted to help out this old man. So the day arrived and he picked me up in his white van, stereotypical, I know. And I told my mom that we'd be back in several hours because the drive would take a pretty long time to get to the shops from where we lived in the country. He ended up taking me to the markets, and I pointed out some gifts that I really thought that his granddaughters would probably like. I didn't really think anything of it at the time, but he never bought any of the stuff that I suggested, but absolutely insisted on buying me a gift for all of my help in order to show his appreciation. Well, after refusing, I finally gave in and chose a top. On the drive home, he started saying I should try on the top to see how it looks. I felt really uncomfortable, as it was just me sitting in the front seat of the van with him all alone, and he was trying to tell me to just quickly swap shirts. I kept politely refusing, saying that I'd wait till I got home, but he absolutely insisted, and then he pulled the van off on the side of the road and said that he'd get out and look the other way while I changed. Wanting this entire ordeal to just be over, I just quickly swapped tops, and then he showered me in compliments and continued driving. Obviously by this point, I was feeling pretty uncomfortable, and when he suggested that we get something to eat, I felt like he was stalling, trying to drag out the time that we had left together on the drive home. I finally gave in and said that I'd eat some lunch, thinking that he would just grab drive-thru or something, but no. Instead, he took me to a semi-fancy restaurant and ordered a fancy lunch for us, along with a bottle of wine. I might like to point out at this time that even though I was 15 years old, I looked a lot older, and people always thought that I looked around 18 or 20. And I'd also like to add that the legal drinking age in Australia is 18. So yeah, the waitress didn't really have an issue bringing us out a bottle of wine. Now, the next part of this story is so stupid on my behalf. So he kept on topping up my glass, and before I knew it, I pretty much drank the entire bottle of wine during that lunch. I guess I was just a stupid, naive teenager who thought it was cool that I was being allowed to drink alcohol. Anyways, after lunch was over, we headed back home, and he kept making comments like,
You have bedroom eyes.
which at the time I had no idea what the hell he was going on about. And as we pulled onto our street, he slowed down the van and then said to me,
You know, your mom will probably be pretty mad at you for drinking alcohol. You should just come inside and freshen up.
Now, even though I was drunk, all of my instincts were telling me not to let myself be alone in that house with this creepy man. I told him no, it's okay. I'll act sober and I'll just go straight to my room. John kept insisting, and he pulled into his driveway. I opened the door, and he then grabbed my wrist, telling me how much trouble I'll be in because I was drunk, and he really thinks that I should just come inside with them. I twisted my wrist and got out of his grip, and then jumped out of the van while it was still slowly driving. I ran away from both his house and mine towards my friend's house, who also lived on the same street as me. I knew her parents were pretty chill, and when her mom opened the door, I told her that I'd drunk some alcohol, hence I needed to sober up before I went home, or that my mom would kill me. She let me sit in her lounge room and gave me water and coffee until I sobered up enough to walk home. I wasn't really sober, but sober enough to walk. I also pretended to be sober once I got home. I didn't tell my mom because I was honestly just so scared about getting in trouble, which seems so stupid now knowing that he was the one who would have gotten in trouble. Anyway, John stopped coming over as much, which I was glad about, and he started giving my parents the cold shoulder, and they didn't know why. Then a few weeks later, I arrived at work where I had a part-time job at a hairdresser sweeping floors, and my manager at the time, who was awesome, privately showed me this long handwritten note that she'd found slipped under the door when she opened up. This is what the note said. You have an employee here who sleeps with her clients' husbands and is a liar and a slut, and all sorts of other bullcrap. It also mentioned at the end of the note that the girl that they were talking about had long black hair, and I was the only one who worked there who had long black hair, and most of the women there were a lot older than me. My manager and I were quite close, and I'd even confirmed to her when I'd had my first kiss with a boy that I had a crush on a few months earlier. I mean, I was still a freaking virgin, and this letter was from some apparently crazy woman that was accusing me of sleeping with her husband and other clients' husbands as well. I mean, what the hell? I took the letters home and showed them to my mom, who was also outraged as well. We couldn't really think of who would do this though. Not long after that happened, my mom and I were in the car and our neighbor John followed us for about a half an hour. By this stage, my mom had picked up on a few weird things that John was doing, like snobbing her and my stepdad. So she was on alert when he followed us for such a huge length of time. Another time, my mom and I came out from buying groceries, and my mom saw that the paint on our car was bubbling and sizzling, like some kind of acid had just been poured all over it. She took it to the car garage across the road, and he said that it smelled like brake fluid or battery acid had just been deliberately poured all over her car. There was also another time where I came home from school, and there was some kind of animal remains on our front step, as if it was put there on purpose. I'd also like to add that the day before, my beloved pet bunny had just mysteriously disappeared. Anyways, not long after this happened, my friend's mom and dad came over to chat with my parents. Apparently John had been going down at the local bakery and harassing all of the young girls working there, including one of my friends who was also 15. I ended up confessing what really happened on the day that he took me Christmas shopping. Both sets of the parents were absolutely shocked and horrified. A few days later, my mom had told the one and only policeman who lived in the town, and because he was friends with my family, he actually looked up this guy and dropped a huge bombshell on us. He told us that John had been in trouble all over Australia for flashing people. His 2 daughters had both filed restraining orders against him, and apparently he had been charged with beating one of his daughters up so bad that he'd put her in the hospital. And apparently he also had been run out of several towns of similar creepy behavior, and I think he had some sort of outstanding charges on him. And you're not even gonna believe what else happened. But wait, the story isn't over quite yet. The police ended up going and searching his house and found a few illegal shotguns, which he wasn't even allowed to have. And the most absolutely creepiest thing for me was that he had a tripod video recorder pointed directly through his curtains right into my room. The policeman also told us that they didn't find any evidence that he was sick and had most likely faked the entire cancer story to groom my parents into trusting him, all so that he could weasel his way into our lives. Luckily for me, not too long after this happened, we moved out of state. And to tie this story up, a couple of years later, my mom had told me that my stepdad had gone and pissed in his water tank just right before we moved. So yeah, I really hope he enjoyed drinking that water. I never did find out the outcome of what happened to him, but I really hope he got locked up for whatever they found in his house. He truly deserves it. I was 19 years old at the time of this story. I was living in Littleton, Colorado at the time. For the short amount of time that I lived there, I had many crazy situations happen to me. For now, I'll tell you about one in particular. It'll probably help to know what I look like so you can better understand why this may have happened to me in the first place. Like I said, I was 19 years old at the time. I stood at about 5'7" and 130 pounds, had wildly colored hair, bright red, several facial piercings, and arm and chest tattoos. It was a warm day, so I was wearing weather comfortable clothes, shorts and a tank top, along with a pair of flip-flops and a sun hat. Because of previous situations that I found myself in, I had stopped taking late night walks. Instead, I went late afternoon. I had let my boyfriend take my truck to work because I didn't have to work that day and I didn't have any plans. But I wanted to surprise him at work and take him out to dinner after he got off, so I started walking up to Broadway towards Colfax. Now, if you've ever lived in Denver or been there for any amount of time, people will generally warn you about Colfax Avenue. It's busy and some sketchy wildlife live there and typically stalk that street. But for some reason, my oh-so-awesome roommates didn't warn this little white girl of the many horrors that could await you on Colfax Avenue. Okay, maybe a bit dramatic, but my experience was not pleasant at all. Back to the story. I turned from Broadway onto Colfax. As soon as I turned, it was like stepping into a whole nother world. There was a bus stop and it was bumping. Also, I'm pretty sure that I saw a guy taking bumps pressed up against the nearest building. Several homeless people were laying and sitting in various places up the street. Two obviously lesbian girls were screaming at each other about something I really didn't care to gather. I walked quickly for about 2 or 3 blocks with my heart in my throat. I'm not really cut out for this sort of social interaction. I accidentally made eye contact with a dirty man lurking in an alleyway. Quickly, I looked down at my flip-flops and continued walking on. After a few blocks, the crowd thinned out a bit and I was feeling less frazzled. I was actually starting to enjoy my walk, but then I noticed this van. It was parked on a side street and trying to look inconspicuous because I could see that the driver slid down in his seat a little bit. I couldn't make out the details, but I could see that it was an older male with a dark complexion and dark short hair. Trying not to stare for too long, I committed this creeper van to my memory. It was a white van with blacked out windows, no company markings, and no front license plate. Red flags are totally going off in my head, but I just push away the feeling. I walk another block or two, and again, I see this van on a side street. It's moved up a couple of blocks as well. I start to get a nervous chill, though I just try to press on, just trying not to look scared. After another couple of blocks, I yet again see this van. I don't know where I think this is heading, so I stand my ground and face this van, staring into this man's face and waiting for a reaction to me noticing him. To my absolute horror, he gets out of the van, then slamming the door behind him. He's a small Spanish man, maybe about 5'4" and 150-ish pounds. He's shorter than me, but he's definitely bigger. My mind starts racing as he then starts running across the road towards me. I'm frozen. I wasn't expecting this. As soon as he reaches me, he then starts speaking in broken English. For the most part, I could understand him. He starts to compliment my hair, my piercings, freckles, and my butt. Joy. Awkwardly, I thank him, now confused. What does he want from me? Why is he so brave? Then he asks me for sex. I nearly choke and I ask him to repeat himself. Not really sure if I was hearing him correctly, but I was. He pulled out his wallet and offered me $200 to have sex with him. I take a large step back as he grabs my butt and then starts licking his lips. I start harshly telling him that I'm not that kind of girl and he's barking up the wrong tree. I then turn and speed walk away from this nasty man, starting to panic as I try to think of a plan on what to do. The man is following me now, waving the $200 around like it could convince me to go back. The first door that I see I then run to and yank it open. I throw myself in at Mach speed and then bounce off the bouncer. I fall on my butt with a yelp. The bouncer helps me get up and he then asks me why I'm in such a hurry. I'm a bit too flustered to make any sense at the moment, and he's asking for my ID. I look around to realize I'm in a pub. I tell him on the verge of tears that I'm only 19 years old and that I'm trying to hide from the creepy man who's following me outside. I'm practically having a panic attack as the bouncer guides me to the bar and then fetches me a glass of water. The bouncer wants a description of the man, and I give it to him. He tells me to hang tight and then he disappears out the door. After a few long minutes, he returns and he tells me the man won't be a problem for me anymore. Reasonably, I'm still pretty scared. The bouncer asks me where I'm heading and I check my GPS on my phone. I'm only about 2 blocks away from my boyfriend's work. The bouncer clocks out on his break and he offers to walk me the 2 remaining blocks. I latch onto the man's arm, thanking him repeatedly. He pats my hand and just kinda laughs, telling me to keep off Colfax moving forward, which I totally promised I would. When we walked into my boyfriend's work, he kinda gave me a quizzical look, like he didn't really know what was going on. I then explained everything that happened to my boyfriend, and he just laughed at me. Perhaps I deserved that, but no one warned me. I didn't take my boyfriend to dinner that night, and I never walked on that street alone ever again. That creepy creeper in the creeper van. I just really hope I don't encounter anyone like that again. That truly was one of the creepiest things to have ever happened to me. Thank God for that bouncer. For some backstory, I'm a female, 18 years old now, and I was 13 when this encounter occurred. This might be kind of long, but bear with me. I promise it gets good. This encounter happened around 2013, and I was a part of this girls-only group. We'd meet up every week and just hang out and do teenage things. There were different locations around my city, and I obviously went to the one closest to me. It was about a 10-minute drive from my house. The building where we met was a massive local park near a lake, which made for plenty of fun times. The group was for girls aged around 13 to 17, so we generally all got along really well. This particular group that I was in met on Thursday nights, and there was about 9 of us. 2 were my family friends who were also my lifelong best friends. Them and 2 other girls and I went to the same school. There was this camp every year. The goal was to do everything yourself. So we had to set up our own campsite, make all our dinners, etc. And it was really fun. I'd been about 2 times previously. It's a competition, and our group would split into 2. Me, Aaron, Izzy, and Jess. The other 5 girls were in another group. One of the things that we had to do to prepare was to go shopping for food. So we did that one night, and we spent the other few nights packing everything we would need, like tents, portable stove, stuff for the fire, etc. My friend Aaron and I were in the same class at school, so the Friday afternoon of the camp we left early and her mom picked us up. We live in the same street, so we got our things and carpooled there with the other girls, Izzy and Jess. The park where all of the camps were was massive. We actually stopped for pizza along the way. The first few nights of the camp went well. We stayed up all night eating candy in our tent, sneaking out and walking around the massive park, talking, playing truth or dare, and never have I ever. You know, normal teenage girl kind of things. On the last full day, we did an activity that we chose prior to going to the camp. Out of all the girls in my group, I was the only one who had chosen to do archery, and I only knew 2 other girls from my main group, and I got to know some of the girls that I didn't really know from the other groups. During the activity, the leaders started acting really weird. They were kind of just looking at each other and whispering and talking on their walkie-talkies. The girls that I knew from our group back at home who weren't in my group at the camp were doing archery too. So I hung around with them and we were all discussing why we thought the leaders were acting so weird. The leaders seemed to get more scared every minute, and they called us over and told us to go into one of the buildings because we were going on lockdown. I stuck with all of the girls, and we and some of the other activity groups went inside. Everyone else from the other activity groups went to the building on the other side of the park, including the girls from my group at this camp. We hung out there chatting to everyone for maybe an hour, and we all talked about the camp so far and what we thought was going on. This one girl named Chloe said that a girl had seen a naked man with a knife walking around in the woods. And there was also another girl named Monique who said that there was a gang in the woods who knew of this girls' camp and wanted to find someone to snatch. Either way, we were all totally freaked out. Then they offered bathroom breaks. We went in groups of 4 outside to the bathrooms, and then 2 leaders escorted us. There happened to be 2 cop cars outside, and I just felt really uneasy. We started to talk with one another, but the leaders led us to the bathrooms and told us to be quiet. When we got into the bathroom, they then explained everything. There was a girl who was named Piper, and she had actually spotted a naked man holding a knife. So Chloe was correct. They told us it was all going to be okay and that the cops were searching for him. They called everyone's parents and the police finished the search. When this was done, One of the cops came into our building and said that they'd got the guy, and we were all safe. We were finally let back into our campsites. When I got to see my friends from the other building back at the tent, I gave them a massive hug, and they asked if I was okay, and I asked them the same. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but the girl who saw the man, Piper, she went home and was obviously traumatized. We were supposed to cook our own dinners that night on the fire, but to celebrate, the leaders ordered a crap ton of pizza, soda, and fries for us to just have a massive feast together. We were all scared as crap that night, and we didn't sneak out of our tent like we had the other nights, because even though the guy had been arrested, we were still totally creeped out. The following year, there was this girl in my class named Hannah. I actually found out that she was part of the same girls' club that I was, but from another location in my city. I slightly recognized her after she told me this. I brought up the incident that happened at camp from the previous year, and she was at the camp too. She was actually part of the orienteering group that saw the guy. She told me that he indeed was naked and did have a knife. I'm guessing he was on something, but it was still creepy as hell. Back in October 2015, I had just left a meetup with some new people from meetup.com. It's late, maybe after 11 p.m., so it's well into nighttime. I'm in an unfamiliar downtown area, and I'm having some trouble finding the parking structure that I left my vehicle in. It's a cold night, and as I'm wandering around the streets, I notice that there aren't a lot of people around. I start to feel a little concerned as more time goes by, and I don't know where I am. I feel a wave of relief when I see what looks like my parking structure a few blocks down. Well, that relief is very short-lived and is quickly replaced with sheer terror. As I'm walking toward the structure, I see about 3 men about 50 feet or so away across the opposite side of the street and set foot on the sidewalk that I'm on. Right away, I start to get an uneasy feeling about them. 2 of them are wearing hoodie sweatshirts with the hoods over their heads, and the third one is wearing a black windbreaker with his hands in the side pockets. They look like trouble, but I need to get to my car, so I figure I'm just being too judgmental and keep walking. But after a few seconds, their conversation quiets down and they then take notice of me. They slow down a bit and I see them exchange glances with each other. One of them looks back at me and I see his head then nod upward, as if he's directing everyone's attention to me. My heart starts pounding, and I hear them all laugh and then start walking towards me yet again. They're all looking right at me. I have to think fast. I want to run, but I'm afraid they'll follow me. Then a sudden idea hits me. I grab my phone and I start pretending that I got a phone call. "Hello?" I say into the phone. "Wait, what? Oh crap!" I put a panicked look on my face and I pat my jacket pocket, pretending that I've lost my wallet. "Yeah, man, you're right. It is gone. You're still at Buffalo Wild Wings, right? Yeah, I'll be right there. Hold on to it for me." Of course, I'm not actually headed to the nearby Buffalo Wild Wings. I hadn't even gone there that night. It was just a ruse to misdirect them. I turn around and start quickly walking away. I hear the guys behind me mutter some words to themselves, but I can't really understand exactly what they're saying, nor do I really care. Their footsteps get louder, sending me into full panic mode. I've now reached the corner and I'm about to start running when I get a horrific chill through my chest as I then hear one of them shout in an angry, sinister tone.
"Hey, wait up, buddy!"
As soon as I round the corner and move behind the nearby building and out of their sight, I then run faster than I've ever run my entire life down that sidewalk. I have no idea where I'm going, but I have to get away from those hoodlums. I can hear their footsteps behind me as they give chase, but I'm running way too fast and I'm way too ahead of them. So there's absolutely no way they're catching me. Their footsteps fade after about 10 seconds or so, and after about a minute or so of running, I stop to catch my breath. Thankfully for me, I've run to the busier section of town where there's a few people still walking around. I stand at the entrance of a nearby pub that's actually still open, keeping my eye out just in case those guys decide to show back up. After about 10 minutes, there's no sign of them, so I decide to head back. I walk quickly, constantly looking in all directions, but I make it back without incident. My heart is still pounding when I make it back to my car. It isn't until I've left the city and make it onto the freeway back home that I finally feel safe. I have no idea who those guys were or what they intended to do to me when they caught up with me. And to anyone listening to this, I offer 2 pieces of advice. Always be aware of your surroundings and make sure you know exactly where to go if you're in an unfamiliar place, especially if you're alone. Stay away from bad parts of town. If a person or a group of people look suspicious and you don't feel safe around them, leave the situation as quickly as you can whenever possible. You don't owe dangerous strangers any explanation or benefit of the doubt. Please stay safe, everyone. About 15 years ago, when I was about 21 years old, I had a night out with some of my friends on the Gold Coast in Australia. I walked up the highway at about 2 a.m. all alone on my way home. It was about a 10-minute walk. The streetlights were on, so the area was pretty well lit up, but there were no cars really passing at that hour. I start to hear the sound of a huge truck coming up the road and not really thinking much of it. As soon as the truck almost passed me, I then hear the sound of the gears changing and the truck slowing down until he stops. He yells out and he asks if I needed a lift, which I decline and just keep walking. At this point, I thought it was really sweet asking a young woman if she needed a lift because I certainly shouldn't have been walking alone at this time. His truck is on the other side of the road, and I then see the door open, and he starts to get out. I then freeze for about a second, and we make eye contact, and now I know that I have to run. I ran so fast all the way through the back streets with him chasing me all the way. Thankfully for me, the man was overweight, so I was able to outrun him, but he probably chased me for a few good minutes. I finally made it home and then ran inside, and I woke up my housemate, who told me that I was white as a ghost. I always think about that night, and I wonder what might have happened if he had caught up to me. It's been 15 years since that happened, and the anxiety is still fresh as the day it happened. A few years ago, I went on a study abroad trip with my university to Australia for a couple of months. We started in Darwin and traveled south. Now, the bus ride itself was pretty uneventful, except for me and my friend being accidentally left at the Devil's Marbles for a few hours, but that's another story. We stayed at a hostel in Alice Springs and then got up before dawn to drive to Uluru. The rest of the students had decided to go back to sleep for the bus ride, but I was looking out the window at what little I could make of the scenery. It was right around that time, right before dawn, when you're first able to make out your surroundings. The bus slowed down to park and made a turn into an empty lot, and that's when I saw it. It was an extremely large shadow walking through the bush. I'm a pretty bad judge of height, but it was taller than any human I had ever seen. Perhaps about 10 feet tall with extremely elongated arms and legs. Even though there was enough light to make out the details of the landscape, the figure appeared completely, detailless. Like it was smooth, black, and completely featureless. The black was a stark contrast to the rest of the scenery, as there was a thin mist in the area. Now, I've seen flashes of shadows driving before, or something out of the corner of my eye, but this was something different. I was able to watch it for several slow seconds as he walked in this weird odd swaying. It was this weird dipping motion with a distinct grace, moving effortlessly across the bush. I felt like as soon as I saw it, I had been electrocuted. Every hair standing up and skin prickling. I tried to wake up my friend, but by the time she looked out the window, it was long gone. Now, I'm sure this could be explained away by possible sleep deprivation or just seeing shadows, but I personally feel that what I saw was real. If anyone has any kind of local legends for that area, please let me know. This happened back in the 90s when I was still in primary school, so I really had no clue how much danger I was actually in. I would have been around 11 years old, living in a regional city of Australia. Now, for the last year, I had been having a lot of trouble at school. I was getting bullied a bit by my classmates and just felt really singled out by my teacher. My mom worked around the corner from my school, so when everything would get too much at school, I would literally just walk out of class down the road and onto her work site. It would take me about a half an hour to walk there, along a main road. There were a couple of times that I noticed a small white car drive past me just really slowly, but I only noticed this because I would see the same car go up and down the street as I was walking and while I was sitting outside of my mom's work site. After a while, I started seeing the same car driving up my street at home, parked along the streets that my brother and I would ride our bikes around. I don't remember thinking it was strange because it was such a small town and it wasn't unusual to see the same cars and people. It was just like, oh, there goes that car again. Well, anyway, my family follows a serious routine. Mondays, swimming and tutoring. Tuesdays, netball training. Wednesday, netball game. Thursdays, basketball training. And Fridays, we would go and see the professional basketball or football depending on the season. Saturday was my brother's basketball games. And Sundays were our day where we'd go to the river with friends for swims and a barbecue lunch. This never changed unless someone was sick. So one Friday night, I'm dressed and ready to go and watch the basketball game, but I can't find my shoes. I'm pretty sure that they're in the car, which is in the garage under our 2-story house. Now, to get to it, I have to walk down the outside steps at the front of the house, which has a full view of the road. I walk out the front door, and at the end of our driveway is that small white car. Now, I've never taken that much notice of the white cars up until this point, and it wasn't uncommon for cars to park in this exact spot for our neighbors. But I just got a weird sinking feeling deep in my stomach when I looked at it. I kept walking down the stairs, and as I got close to the bottom, the driver's side door then opens, and then this man gets out very quickly. I keep walking towards the garage, and he starts moving towards our driveway. That was the moment when something inside me just told me to scream for my parents and then run and lock myself in the car. I did exactly that, and this guy, whoever he was, turned around, ran back to his car, and then drove off. By the time my parents heard me and came out, there was absolutely no evidence that this even happened, and they didn't even believe me. About a week later in my school, there happened to be a notice in our school newsletter about some man in a white car that was attempting to abduct another child from my school on the very same night. My parents were very shaken over this, and they took me seriously after reading that. I don't believe he was ever caught, but it definitely taught me to listen to my intuition and always take notice of my surroundings. Please, everyone, I know you hear this all the time, but seriously, always be aware of your surroundings. You just never know who's lurking around the corner or what could happen. This happened at a large shopping center in Adelaide, South Australia a couple of months ago. For some context, it was around 7 p.m. on a late trading night, already completely dark outside. I was shopping with my partner and she went into a clothing store, both to make some returns and also try on some replacement clothes. I knew it would only take a little bit of time and I'm not overly interested in women clothing, so I stood outside in the very busy center and was responding to some work emails on my phone and paying very little attention to all of the people walking past me. After about 5 minutes, I was then approached by a fairly young looking gentleman. He was early to mid-20s at most. I'm 23 myself. He had a very strong European accent, possibly French, who then said something to me along the lines of,
"You were with a girl, yes? She was looking for you. She came up to me, I think, because we are wearing similar shirts and thought you were me."
Thinking back on it, other than the buttons on our shirts, there was nothing really similar at all. He told me that she was trying to find me and made it seem like something was wrong, and then he insisted that he could show me where she went. I looked inside of the store and I couldn't see my partner. I was extremely confused at the time. My partner knows that I could just be aimlessly pacing in circles outside, as I do when I'm reading my emails, and she would never just walk off looking for me. Not to mention, she could have just texted or called me. Although confused, he was moving away pretty fast enough that I didn't have any time to ask many questions, and not being able to see my partner convinced me to at least follow where he was going. There had to have been hundreds of people around at the time, so I wasn't very worried for my own well-being. As I followed the gentleman, I was leaving a good 2 or so meters between us, walking behind. I don't remember feeling overly unsafe or concerned about being near him, just really confused and unsure. He could see that, and he kept repeating something along the lines of,
"This isn't a joke. Please believe me. I want to help you. Come with me. She went this way. I saw where she went."
We had only been walking for about 10 seconds at this point, but we were covering a fair bit of distance from the store that I was originally at. I said something like, "Where was she going? What did she say to you?" And he then told me,
"Sorry, my English isn't very good. She is this way."
So we kept walking like this for around another 10 seconds before we reached the doors of the building. We were on a side of the center that has doors leading to both a car park and a large loading dock for one of the supermarkets. Although busy in the center, there was almost no one around the doors going in and out. The man then walked straight outside and said something along the lines of,
"She was sitting just on this bench. I don't know where she went."
Other than a small bit of light under the cover where a bench is, it was completely dark as soon as you walked any further away. I walked up to the point where the automatic door is open, but no further, and then looked. He then said something like,
"She must have walked this way. Come, I'll help you find her."
And then started to walk left, which only leads to a dark and secluded loading dock. You could tell the urgency that he was trying to convey to follow him. I really want to add that I was already very confused and unsure up until that point. But as soon as it happened, I knew that whatever he wanted me to follow him down there for wasn't good. It was one of those moments where you piece it all together and then realize how many warning signs you somewhat noticed but then ignored. I just instantly knew I was in danger and I needed to get away now. I remember saying to the guy, "You know, man, don't worry about it. I'll just call her." And then turning straight around and walking back inside. I then turned around after a few seconds, and I couldn't see him outside anymore. Now, although this felt like a really long time, all of this had transpired in just about 45 seconds from when he first started talking to me. And it was at this point that I started texting my partner, who let me know that she was still at the same store that I last saw her at. I then told my partner that I believed I was almost abducted. A bit over the top, especially for a fairly large 20-year-old bloke, I think. I'm assuming that if I actually went down there, I was probably just getting robbed or something. I'm really glad that I'll never know. After this all happened, I decided to go straight to the center security and report it. They took some of the details of where and when it happened, but didn't really seem overly concerned about it. All I know is I had a bad feeling, and there's no telling what was going to happen to me. I really hope I never experience anything like this ever again. This happened in my first year at uni in Australia. I was moving out of home for the very first time, and I think this made me very, very naive in this situation. I'd also like to add I'm a 20-year-old female. I found a really cheap place in the city near my workplace and uni at the time. It was for a room in a share house only about 20 minutes out from the CBD. It seemed like a real awesome deal to me, and I messaged the landlord and told her I was interested. Before she gave me some time to come and inspect the place, she seemed overly interested in my ethnic background. I'm half Ethiopian, so I definitely don't look white, but when I told her I'm Australian, she suddenly became withdrawn. I thought it was strange. Maybe she thought I was lying because she had seen my profile photo on flatmates.com. So I explained my background. She seemed pretty satisfied with my answer, and we organized a time for me to come and see the room. I will call the landlord Denise for the sake of the story. Denise showed me around and talked as if the place is already mine, which I thought was pretty exciting. There was a main house with about 5 bedrooms, a caravan on the side, and a granny flat behind it with 3 bedrooms, and that's where I would be moving in. The main house and caravan were pretty full. There were about 7 people living there, but only one of the rooms in the granny flat was occupied. It was nice enough considering, and very clean. A weekly cleaner was actually included in the rent price, as well as a weekly maintenance man. I didn't really think to ask what that meant because I was already pretty set on moving into the place. I then met the people who would go on to be my housemates. All of them were foreigners, mostly Chinese or South Korean who had come over here to study. I still didn't really find any of this odd. I mean, there's plenty of international students here already. The door to my room had a lock on it, and I was told only myself and Denise had a key. But Denise never usually came to the house, so there was a nice level of privacy. About a week after I moved in, I met the maintenance guy. Let's call him Patrick. He seemed to be gardening, and he then came over to introduce himself, and he seemed pretty nice enough. I then found out he's Denise's brother, and he looked to be around in his late 40s or so. I found him to be a bit awkward, but I've been raised to be polite to a fault, so I ended up talking to him for a really long time before going back to my room. I don't really remember what we talked about, but I remember that he kept saying things like I was very beautiful, and describing my skin as exotic and caramel more than once, which really rubbed me the wrong way. A few days later, the cleaner comes also. She's super lovely and has known Denise and Patrick for a long time. She and I had a really nice chat, and for some reason she decided to bring up that Patrick was on the autism spectrum. So that kind of explained his awkwardness to me, and I realized he's harmless. I actually felt kind of bad about my initial judgment of him. The next time I saw Patrick, I came out into the kitchen and saw him standing there. This struck me as odd. 1, it was in the morning and I was in my pajamas, having just woken up. And 2, he's the maintenance guy. I really didn't understand why he should be inside in the first place, but I still felt bad, so I just kind of smiled and said hello to him. He then turned and seemed startled, but explained to me that he was just taking out the trash. I saw that he had replaced the bins in the kitchen, so I was just like, oh, okay. He's just trying to be nice, I guess. But I still told him that he really didn't have to do that. He just kind of insisted, and I just let it be. No big deal. So I ended up talking to him again, and once again, he seemed to have this really weird fixation with me being exotic, even though I told him I was born in Australia. But he was mostly just generally asking how I was finding the place, and he then reiterated that everything was super safe, and for some reason he brought up the keys to the bedrooms. He said only me, Denise, and he had keys. I didn't say anything out loud, but in my head I just kind of thought, wait, so when does he have a key to my place? But I still just kind of brushed it off. Cut to a few months later. So I work about 4 to 6 days a week, as well as going to university 4 days. So I'm really rarely there during the day, and I always lock my bedroom door before leaving every day. I don't remember exactly what time of year this would have been, but I know it was around the colder time, and I haven't used the ceiling fan in my room for a really long time. I got home, unlocked my bedroom door, and the ceiling fan was on. Now, this struck me as odd immediately. I just knew that I hadn't turned it on in forever. I was really confused, and I thought that I'd turned it on while leaving, and maybe I just didn't remember. I brought it up with my roommate, and she just kind of shrugged and said that it's odd, but she didn't really seem weirded out by it. So I figured I was just overthinking it. I'd also like to add that I always kept to myself a lot. I wasn't close to any of my roommates, and I only talked to this woman occasionally. A few weeks later, I'm leaving for work, and I have this really strange feeling while walking to the front gate of the house. For some reason, I decided to turn around, and I see Patrick hiding behind some trees, just staring at me. As soon as he's caught, he then turns and pretends to be gardening. In the moment, my mind actually kind of went blank. I mean, surely he wasn't watching me, right? All I did was frown and kind of just wonder to myself why he would even stare at me like that and then pretend he hadn't been. I come back later in the day, unlock my door, walk in, and again, something's just really off, but this time I can't put my finger on it. I stand in my room looking around, just staring at everything in the room, but I can't find anything. When I realize that I don't really know what I'm looking for, I just feel kinda creeped out and leave my room, and I tell my roommate again that I thought someone had been in my room. This time, however, she sat down with me and basically said that she thought someone had went into her room as well. We started a chat and she said that she had left her bedroom window open when she went to work, and when she came home it was shut. I brought up the fan again and my roommate said that maybe we should let Denise know about this. So I texted Denise and said something along the lines of, "So I think someone's been going into my room because of X and X event," and my roommate said the same thing. I exchanged a few messages with Denise, but the general response was just, "Oh, wow, that's so bizarre." Again, being super naive, young, and too polite for my own good, I assumed that I was just overreacting and I didn't want to seem like a bad tenant. Thankfully for me, it turns out that Denise was more than sympathetic than I realized because she said she was going to have the locks changed the very next day. I was just really excited and assumed that that would be it. But in my head, I was just thinking, only 3 people have the keys. Me, Denise, and Patrick. So, I mean, if someone had been coming in, wouldn't it have been one of us 3? Which is also why that I didn't really feel good when Patrick showed up the next day to change the lock himself. You know, being the maintenance guy and all. I ended up leaving while he did the change to the locks. I got a text message later on saying that it was done and the new keys were in the mailbox. Fast forward. I had now been in this place for nearly a year. By now I was aware that Patrick seemed to come over about twice a week, and he always came inside the house to take out the rubbish, but never seemed to really do any maintenance work. I kind of just chalked it up to Denise giving him a job because maybe he couldn't find one anywhere else, and I always tried to avoid him whenever necessary. As far as I can remember, nothing really seemed that strange, that is, until now. I come home from work again and walk into my bedroom while I'm getting my clothes to shower. I noticed something very, very strange that was definitely not there when I left. There was some kind of whitish/pale gunk that was kind of splattered upwards on the wall and the floor. Honestly, my first thought when looking at it after a while was like, that looks like a donut glaze or something. I leaned a little closer to it, but still didn't really register what the stuff was, only that I definitely hadn't spilled anything there at all. So again, I got pretty creeped out, went into the kitchen to grab a Chuck's and then wipe it up, when I then had a thought like, wait, is that semen? I really didn't know what to look for, but as soon as I had that thought, there was really nothing that could convince me otherwise. And again, my bedroom door had been locked. Only myself, Denise, and Patrick had keys. My roommate wasn't home, but I decided to call Denise right away. She didn't answer, so instead I decided to message her and basically said that someone had been in my room and there was some weird stuff plastered all over my wall. I wanted to see if she had come to the same conclusion as I did. Her response this time was really off. She messaged me back a few hours later and was really dismissive and said something along the lines of, "Well, that's pretty bizarre, but the lock has been changed." I mean, yeah, obviously, so who do you think would have been in there? I felt so weird and grossed out that I went to a friend's place and messaged my stepdad about it. I told him about everything for the first time, and I guess it sounds a lot worse when it's all at once because his response was like, "Hell no, you're moving out of there ASAP." I called Denise and told her I was going to move out if the issue wasn't taken seriously. This is when I started to realize that the leasing situation at this place was really dodgy, which I didn't really know beforehand due to lack of experience and no sense to ask. Essentially, there was really no record of me actually being a tenant, and I was kind of just sending money into this lady's bank account, but there wasn't any official paperwork. I looked back over all of the stuff that I'd signed when I initially moved in, and it was all typed up by Denise, I assume. I don't remember the details, but it wasn't official at all. I was so naive. So anyways, I was pretty much able to move out ASAP. Denise didn't put up a fuss about the short notice. And when I came back the next day, the stuff on the wall was gone, so I didn't really have any proof of what happened. But still, that just kind of confirmed to me that something weird was going on with Denise and Patrick. My stepdad helped me take all of my stuff, and Denise just left a message asking me to leave the keys on the counter. It really took me a few weeks to process all of the creepy things that happened to me throughout my stay and put it all together as a massive creep fest. My roommate left soon after as well. A couple of months later, she messaged me to say that one of the old housemates told her that the police were called to the place, but I don't know why or what happened. But if I had to take a guess, I really doubt it was over the tenants. Patrick and Denise. I don't know what the heck was going on or what you guys were up to, but I really hope I don't see either of you ever again. I'm an 18-year-old male. I moved from my hometown with my mom about a year ago, now into a farmhouse pretty much in the middle of nowhere on the east side of Australia. It was at the very end of a 7-kilometer long driveway that had about 2 other houses on it, both with elderly couples in them, and a 30-minute drive from the nearest town, which is very small, only having about 1,000 people living there. I'd feel really uncomfortable some nights when I was outside having a cigarette, the old feel like you're being watched feeling, and occasionally would wake up and hear footsteps outside that I was sure didn't sound like the sheep and rams that were right near our place. Now, I have a history of drug abuse and I'm quite a paranoid person because of it, so I tried to rationalize it all by telling myself I was just being paranoid. One night, I woke up at around 3 a.m. and needed to take a piss when I looked out my bedroom window and very briefly saw a flash of light like it had come off a torch or a phone. Seeing as though we lived in the middle of freaking nowhere, this really freaked me out quite a lot, and I stayed up until morning just listening and looking out, but I didn't really hear anything. Maybe about a week later or so, my stepdad's lawnmower had its tire slashed, which my stepdad had blamed on me, but I didn't really care because it just further enforced the idea that there was somebody lurking around our property. My mom knows that I would never do something like that, and instead she thought that the neighbor had done it. I always chatted with the neighbor when I went for walks, and I really liked him, and I really doubt that he would have done it, let alone be able to walk that far, as he was pretty old, and if he came in a vehicle that late at night, we definitely would have heard it. My stepdad actually ended up moving out because of it, and I don't mean to get too personal, but he's a drinker. I witnessed him on the verge of being very violent with my mom, and I actually intervened and messed him up a little. So he moved out the next day, and thankfully, we haven't really seen him since. And no, the things that happened after he was gone were 100% not him. It wasn't even considered to us that it could be him, because it just wasn't. Trust me. With him now gone, and it only being me, my mom, and my 3-year-old sister there, and considering we can't legally own a gun in Australia, and the cops would take a good hour to get out to us if we needed them, I got increasingly paranoid about all of the things that had been going on, because I felt like I had to be protective. Some nights I would stay up very late, and before going to sleep, I would turn off all of the lights and walk around silently looking out the windows for any signs. And sure enough, on a few occasions, I would see torches way off in the distance in the middle of the cow paddocks, as if somebody saw all of the house lights turn off and started making their way over at 3 a.m. Which is really weird to say the least, considering that in every direction other than towards the other houses on our road, there was absolutely nothing but bush and paddocks for a good 20 kilometers. I should also add that our front door didn't properly lock and could easily be opened by just messing with the handle a bit. So I started putting a wheelbarrow up against the door and a metal sheet behind the wheelbarrow so if the door opened it would make a very loud noise that would definitely wake me up. A few weeks went by and I saw and heard absolutely nothing, so I began to get much less paranoid and was thinking about it a lot less. One night I had gotten back from the pub and I was a bit drunk, still on my phone in the lounge room. All of the lights were off because my mom and my sister were asleep, and I was just kind of laying there texting whoever and listening to music. We have 2 cats, and on this night they were pretty frisky and running around pretty wildly. So when I heard the metal sheet that I had in front of the door then slam on the ground, I figured it was just the cats and ignored it and walked straight past to my room maybe about half an hour later, not even giving it a glance. The very next morning, my paranoia immediately came back in full swing. I proceeded to freak out when I see that not only the sheet had fallen over, the door itself was ajar and the wheelbarrow had moved a good 6 inches as well, which there's no way either of my cats could have done that. The only explanation I have for this is that somebody tried to let themselves in, heard the bang, and then ran off. A few nights after this all happened, my mom woke me up pretty late at around 4 a.m. She asked me to come out to her car with her because all of her car lights were on, and she didn't want to go out by herself. We went outside and turned it all off and brought the keys, which we'd usually just leave in the car with us inside. The car battery was dead and we would have to get our neighbor to come down with some jumper cables the following day. She was absolutely certain that she didn't leave any of the lights on and that all of the doors were shut, meaning somebody went inside, pressed the button on the roof, put the key in the ignition, and then exited and closed the door, with what we think was the intention of draining the battery. She began agreeing with me that somebody was definitely lurking around the house and told me a few things that she had noticed that she just didn't want to tell me because I was already anxious about it all, and she didn't want to make it worse. She told me that the tank water started tasting really funny, and she found a half-dead decomposed possum on the grate on top of the tank. She didn't really mention how she couldn't possibly see how it could have ended up there unless it happened to die right there on that exact spot, and somehow didn't start making the water taste funny until it was so decomposed that you could see its bones, and also how a garden rock was then moved in a weird position right outside her window, as if somebody was using it to stand on to look inside. I'd also like to add that the house closest to the road had multiple dogs. The one that I was pretty friendly with, who lived closer, maybe about 3 kilometers from us, had a gun, and he would often shoot rabbits and foxes. So that definitely makes us the easiest target. All of these strange things made us really concerned, and we ended up finding a house and moving out about a month later. I know this is anticlimactic, but it still freaks me the heck out, as I can't think of any other explanation other than somebody was lurking around our house for multiple months. There were many times where there was nobody home all day, so if they wanted to steal from us, they easily could have come in and just taken all of our stuff, but nothing was ever missing. Maybe I really am just overthinking all of this, but I really do believe that whoever it was had some very sinister intentions and were intentionally just screwing with us. Maybe it was innocent pranks, or maybe there was someone around who just really wanted us gone. I really have no idea, but I'm just really glad we no longer have to deal with it anymore. These encounters happened in early 2016. These encounters happened to me in early of 2016. I live in Perth, Western Australia, and was living in the suburb of Palmyra at the time. The local supermarket was called Woolworths, and it was conveniently situated right across the road from mine and my girlfriend's house at the time. Obviously, groceries were a necessity, and one day I was smoking outside in the car park of the grocery store, reading a book on criminal psychology. I was in my own little world when I felt someone tap on me on the shoulder and ask for a lighter. She was one of the shop's employees on her break. She had shoulder-length brunette hair and dark eyes, and she looked to be around the same age as myself. As we were smoking, we started casually chatting, and she looked at my book with curiosity, then explaining to me that serial killers had always fascinated her. I agreed, as criminology and true crime has always been one of my favorite topics ever since I was a teenager. She suddenly got this really weird smile across her face and told me that she'd actually written a book about serial killers. The hairs on my arm stood on end, but I brushed it off as it just being cold, as it was quite windy that day. She said she had to go back to work, but that I should come by some other day and chat crime with her. She shook my hand and told me that her name was Gemma. Looking back, I got a really strange feeling from her. A slight uncomfortable twist in the gut that I just kind of passed off as her seeming to be a bit of an outcast. She just seemed a bit different, but nothing that was overly concerning. Over the next few weeks, I saw Gemma sporadically and even had a few coffees with her at Smoko. Smoko is smoke break, by the way. We didn't really talk about anything personal. She was very guarded and vague if I asked any personal questions, but she could talk my ear off about music, serial killers, and crime. She had her favorite killers that she had found most interesting. One particular incident that stood out to me was when we were debating the use of the death penalty in America, when she then grabbed my arm out of the blue and then said, "Don't you ever want to know what it feels like to kill someone?" I was taken aback as it was such a direct question, and one that I could never even think of doing, let alone feeling. I shrugged my shoulders and then said, "No way. I'd rather be a criminal psychologist and help put killers away." She kind of just stared off into the distance and then said, "I think I could do it. I mean, if I really wanted to." Work started to get really busy for the next few months, and I didn't really see Gemma after that. I asked some of the other employees, but they said that she was on holidays. Shortly after that, I moved out of that house, so I never visited that shop again. I never really gave another thought. I was absolutely shocked to see and read the news articles about a year and a half later that she and an older female friend of hers had actually murdered an autistic teenager, and she was actually in prison awaiting sentencing. It made my blood run cold. I always look back now and feel really horrified that I even talked criminology with her. I've always been interested in wanting to know why criminals behave in certain ways, but it gives me a sick feeling to think that that was the subject of our conversations. I feel so bad for the murdered guy's family. It's just so tragic. I definitely hope I never see Gemma ever again, and I really hope justice gets served.